founder and director of Rooftop Ministries since 1989. I specialize in the 56 co-Masonic orders for women and children, sponsored by Freemasons and their wives, and children, including the Order of the Eastern Star, the International Order of Rainbow for Girls, Job's Daughters, and Order of the Eagle Eye. I also study Masonic philanthropies, including the children's homes, schools, camps, shrine hospitals, clandestine Masons, including Indian Masonry and Prince Hall Masonry, and secret societies in general. Let me start by telling you my story of membership in a secret society. It was on my 12th birthday at recess, on May 9th, my 12th birthday, when my friend Pam ran over to me and handed me a petition to join the International Order of the Rainbow for Girls. Rainbow is a co-Masonic order for girls, which at that time you had to be a close relative of Mason or a friend of another Rainbow girl and had to be at least 12 years old to join. At that time, now enrollment is open to most any girl, and they can pledge membership at the age of 8. Pam had been enticing me to join for a while, but wouldn't give me any juicy details about what specifically took place in the meetings. I took the petition home and filled it out that night. My mother signed it and mailed it back to the local assembly. An investigating committee consisting of Rainbow girls and the mother advisor of the assembly visit prospective candidates and their parents to screen them, and I was no exception. They reported back to the assembly, who then balloted on my petition, and with the ballot being clear, I was initiated at the very next initiation meeting on June 21st. It was a very elaborate, beautiful, and yet overwhelming 2-hour ceremony that I experienced that night. 1 year later, I was elected to the Station of Faith. This is the first step in becoming the worthy advisor who presides over the local assembly. After holding the Station of Faith, the Rainbow Girls spends 1 term each occupying the stations of Hope, Charity, Worthy Associate Advisor, and this culminates in her installation ceremony, similar to an inauguration where she is installed as Worthy Advisor. I attained this position at the tender age of 15. During my term as a Worthy Advisor, my assembly was visited by a Grand Deputy, who nominated me to Grand Assembly, which is the state level of Rainbow, with Supreme Assembly being the national level of Rainbow. The following summer, at age 16, I was installed as Grand Representative in the state of Iowa. In all, there were less than a handful of the 20 regular and 5 installing offices that I had not occupied in the local assembly during my 9 years of membership. My assembly had bestowed an honor upon me and several awards upon me. I earned the merit bars. My name was supposedly on the list to be initiated into the Grand Cross of Color, which is the honorary 2nd degree of Rainbow. I accepted Christ at the age of 18, and mature Christians from a youth organization that I was involved with were opposed to Rainbow and to Masonry in general. They urged me to leave Rainbow, but when I pushed them for an answer as to why, they were at a loss for answers, which is not uncommon, such is the nature of Masonry. But the Lord prompted me to apply for demit to leave the order, a demit being the opposite of an admit. So I applied, and I stopped attending meetings. I thought I was out of Rainbow, but Rainbow wasn't out of me. Eventually, I came to renounce the 16 vows, pledges, oaths, and obligations that I had sworn at the Rainbow altar. These were renewed annually with the rest of my assembly. I tried to be suspended for non-payment of dues, but someone covered these for me 2 years in a row. Then I was still too old to still be a member, but my assembly kept contacting me. Finally, 22 months after petitioning for my demit, which at the most should only take 6 weeks to grant, I received my majority card, which is the equivalent of an honorary discharge, which would make me an honorary lifetime adult Rainbow member. My assembly never granted me my demit, which is against their own rules. But I no longer buy into their once a member, always a member mentality. I'm now an ex-Masons for Jesus. Freemasonry is probably the most well-known secret society today, both nationally and internationally. It is considered to be the father of most modern-day secret societies. With several theories as to its beginnings, it is sometimes difficult to unravel the facts about Masonry from the myths and the conspiracy theories. One could speak forever about Masonry and never come to the end of its truths or its tales. The only secret remaining about Freemasonry is that there are no secrets about Freemasonry remaining. This workshop will be interspersed with references to Freemasonry as one model example of a common secret society because of its relative familiarity to the public and because of my own knowledge of the order. Three prominent features that most secret societies and fraternal organizations hold in common are secrecy, initiation, and elitism. Initiations and rites, according to 101 Questions About Freemasonry on page 69, are an approved usage, custom, or ceremony to provide instruction and convey rights to the petitioner or an initiate. Now in Freemasonry, you have rites of circumambulation, which is an element of sun worship, which is circular motion around a central object, which in Masonry is the altar in the middle of the assembly room. There are rites of divestiture, which is removing something. In Masonry, it is actually removing the outer garments. Rites of investiture, which is receiving something. Rites of illumination, by which you are illuminated. In Masonry, that is having the hoodwink removed, the blindfold removed from their eyes. Rites of discalciation, whereby the shoes are removed, and which is also not uncommon in other faiths. And rites of entrusting, whereby the secrets are passed onto the candidate from the organization to the candidate during the initiation. And feel free to stop me at any time for questions. The ritual of initiation, with all the secrets that it entails, separates the member of the society from a non-member and creates a we versus they mentality. Now in Rainbow, we, the members, were considered adept or trained, and the they, which would be you, would be considered profane. And it's not necessarily the profane that you would be used to, but in Masonry, the word being pro, which would have the meaning before, and phanum, which would mean the temple, or outside the temple, being combining the two words, meaning outside the temple or not initiated. This together would be believing that I know something you don't know. It's feeling that you're on the inside because you know the secret. It's the childish, I belong. To be entrusted with a secret unites us with our friends, but yet not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can join these groups. Some secret societies are very strict about their membership. Ethnicity can be a dividing factor, and segregation still exists in many Masonic lodges, especially in the southern jurisdiction of the United States. In my 9 years of membership in Rainbow, I never met another Rainbow girl who was not Caucasian and Protestant. Do you remember when you were a child and you promised your friends, cross my heart and hope to die? When you were a child, or stick a needle in your eye, I guess was the end of it. I'm sure you do. That was pretty serious stuff when you were a kid. Well, keeping secrets as a child is not all that different from when you're an adult. Now, the Scottish Rite Masons and Blue Lodge Masons aren't that different. They swear horrible blood oaths at their initiations. one of the newsletters that I have from Saints Alive in Jesus has a portion of one of the rituals, and I'd like to read it for you at this time. This is from, I believe it's from Scottish Rite. It says, the obligation in this degree, called the Masters 9 of Elect, is now given to the candidate in the usual form. While the candidate is kneeling at the altar, the companions all stand over him with raised poniards as if about to stab him. Meanwhile, a horrible bloody head sits on the altar facing him. He swears this oath. I do solemnly swear in the presence of Almighty God that I will revenge the assassination of our worthy master Hiram Abiff, not only on the murderers, but also on all who may betray the secrets of this degree, and furthermore, that I will keep and protect this order with all my might, and the brethren in general with all my power, and furthermore, that I will obey the decrees of the Grand Council of Princes of Jerusalem. And if I violate my obligation, I consent to be struck with a dreadful poniard of vengeance, now presented to me, and to have my head cut off, and stuck on the highest pole or pinnacle in the eastern part of the world as a monument of my villainy. Amen, 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 amen. The vows here are sealed with the fifth libation, or the sealed obligation. The candidate is given the human skull filled with wine, which he drinks after swearing that if the sin of the person whose skull this once was be heaped upon my head, in addition to my own, and may appear in judgment against me, both here and hereafter, should I violate or transgress any obligation in Masonry or the orders of this knighthood. That's Freemasonry.
Lora, how seriously do you think that's still taken today? I mean, do they really? I mean, in the rituals today, as the practice in Blue Lodge Masonry, how serious are those actually taken out of? How impressionable? How much does that impress upon their minds?
The question is, how seriously are these still taken today? These oaths, they are not taken as seriously as they used to be, and I don't think they are carried out at all. But the impression that they were made on were taken quite seriously. Back in days of old, there was the Captain William Morgan case, whereby he had supposedly revealed and published the secrets of Masonry, and that he was supposedly murdered by the Masons. Now, his body was never recovered, and, well, there's the discrepancy whether his body was recovered or not, and so it's still up in the air whether it was actually the Masons who killed him or not.
Secret.
Yeah, it's a secret, and but there's not the executions, they're just the frivolous, the hype behind them.
But would you say it's like a very strong social sanction for revealing them among members of the orders?
The question is there the social sanction?
I mean, it's definitely a taboo.
Taboo to reveal them, yes. And there's the very strong element of secrecy of keeping them, not only within Masonry, but within all the co-Masonic orders as well. I remember as a rainbow girl that I was not even to let my mother read the rainbow ritual. Her not being affiliated with any Masonic body, I could not go to her to practice any of my rainbow rituals, but was to turn to another rainbow girl instead. This created quite a chasm between my mother and I, and the secrecy divided us and created quite a problem. But the secrecy was very tangible. Yes.
Wouldn't it be safe to say, though, Lori, that the Bible sort of speaks, the New Testament speaks against the idea of taking blood oaths?
Yes, the
like you're
Bible.
doing here?
Yes, the Bible does talk about not taking oaths, and not, I think that carries on to, of course, not swearing blood oaths. When I was coming out of Rainbow, more specifically, I clung on to the scripture back in Numbers 30 that said, Numbers 30, 3-5, when a young woman still living in her father's house makes a vow to the Lord or obligates herself by a pledge, and her father hears about her vow or pledge but says nothing to her, then all her vows and every pledge by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her father forbids her when he hears about it, none of her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. The Lord will release her because her father has forbidden her. During the 22 months that I was trying to leave Rainbow, my father, unbeknownst to me, had joined Masonry. And even though he would have consented to my staying in Rainbow, I knew that my Heavenly Father had wanted me to leave Rainbow, and what His Word said about my participation in that overruled what my earthly father would have said. So I knew not to stay in Rainbow, and that my Heavenly Father already spoke against that. So that's the word that I stood upon. Any other questions?
I just a comment. I've been to a Mason conference, and the witnesses were that those who are really high up the rank and they know all the secrets, if they leave, many of them have been threatened many times to be killed by telephone, by letter, by all kinds of, this is serious still today.
Yes.
An oath is still an oath, and Jesus said, your word should be yes or no. And if we go after the Bible, no oath is even necessary. Our word should be good as Christians. So
the comment is that when people are leaving Masonry, that there are many threats to be killed, and I believe that those threats are very real. I've heard it firsthand, especially from many pastors who are in the pulpit speaking actively against Masonry. And yes, those threats are very real. I've heard it time and time again. I don't think any of those threats have been carried out, but the threats are real. People are losing their jobs. Preachers are losing their pulpits because of their stance against Masonry. People are losing their jobs. They are being forced out of town. They are losing their homes. And there's a lot of ruckus raised because of the stance against Masonry.
Yeah, just a documentation of this. There's a Southern Baptist pastor in the Akron, Ohio area. His name is, still is, Stuart Rothberg, converted Jewish fellow. And he noticed that there was a bunch of Masons in the church. And so began to give a series from the pulpit on Masonry. And make a long story short, Stuart lost his pastorate from a Southern Baptist church, in a fairly large Southern Baptist church in Ohio, because they just would not tolerate him talking about Masonry. And this is not hearsay. Stuart told me this in the living room of my home, and then he went down to Houston and now works in a ministry in Houston with some church down in the Houston, Texas area. So, it does happen. He lost his pastor.
Yes, the comment was that a gentleman, pastor, pastor? Or
Yes, senior pastor.
Senior pastor of a church lost his pulpit because of taking a stance from the pulpit about speaking against Freemasonry. Another testimony about that. What are secret societies? Once the secrecy, the sensationalism, and the conspiracy theories have been removed. Secret societies originated very long ago, several following a long lineage, most having faded out of existence. Many of these secret societies cropped up suddenly, like the myriad in the 19th century America, having been newly created, the realizations of someone's imagination. Some are still meeting today. Secret societies have had a great impact throughout the world, having played a large role in history as well as present day. They are found in many countries and civilizations and are too numerous to count. Alan Axelrod, in his book Secret Societies, says that secret societies are probably as old as anything else recognizable as human culture. A primitive secret society is the equivalent of an extended and idealized family. And just as we can trust family members, so we can trust people who are members of our own totem, sodality, blood brotherhood, or clan by marriage. In the book 101 Questions About Freemasonry, published by the Masons, on page 38, quote, says, "Man has always devised ceremonies of initiation for his organizations. Ancient religions admitted to the temple only those who could qualify by successfully completing a course of initiation. Many modern churches, especially those denominated high, have set forms for religious worship, crafts, and guilds in all kinds and ages have had certain preparatory rites. A ritual tends to stabilize truth and to keep it uncontaminated by modern ideas." Secret societies are notorious for creating highfalutin names and titles for themselves. One example from Masonry would be the ancient Arabic order Nobles of Mystic Shrine. Now, if you pick that name apart, it refers to the ancient, that came from days of old, Arabic, referring to,
Abraham.
order, nobles, royalty, of the mystic, shrine, meaning religious. These infer power, majesty, antiquity, but typically these are always out of proportion to their size and influence in the real world. They tend to draw people whose lives are so ordinary that they crave the exaltation that these societies come with. If you think about Howard Cunningham from the Happy Days, who wanted to be the Grand Poobah of his local lodge. But on the other hand, these fancy names can attract distinguished individuals, even royalty, if you think about England. I wish I had found the chart that I was looking for that had names of them. I'm going to put up some logos of different secret societies just to take a look at. I have a couple pages of them you can look at while I'm speaking. These came off the internet that are pretty accurate, and just kind of pieced these together. Some of you may recognize, others not. The OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, the old Rosicrucian Cross, and the AMORC, which is the other order of Rosicrucians, Knights of Malta, the Order of Skull and Bones, which both Bushes are members of, the Golden Dawn, Another branch of Masonry, the Templars. York Rite is Masonry, which is also known as the American Rite. The opposite of this is the Scottish Rite. York Rite has an additional 10 degrees beyond the Blue Lodge, and the Scottish Rite having another 30 degrees.
Excuse me, Lori,
Yes.
question. Have you ever heard, Pastor said this, and I don't have any reason to believe it's true, but he said that the skull and bone fraternity, or whatever they call it, at Yale University that George Bush Sr. belonged to, and I didn't know his son did, that somehow that is connected to Masonry, and I've never heard that. Is there any background on that?
I haven't studied that quite at length yet. I do have a couple of books that mention it.
In relationship to Masonry?
Well, it talks about it as a society, and I've got books on even Greek letter societies. There's the connections and the basis of it is still kind of blurry, and I'd like to get into that more, not necessarily in this session. I'm hoping to come back next year and do a talk, Secret Societies 301. Go into that a little bit more in depth. I didn't know I had quite so much time today. This goes till what time? 10:15. Okay, that gives a little bit more time. I wasn't sure we had so much time today. And it's 7 o'clock now?
It's 9:30 now.
9:30.
Yeah,
Okay.
45 minutes.
So, let's see. All right.
So maybe what you should do, you should stand a little bit on the side so that those guys can see the pictures also.
Okay. The top ones are different insignia of Masonic logos. Let's see, we have the Masonic square and compass, the shrine, the double-headed eagle from the Scottish Rite, the Crusaders, you have the Masonic trowel, you have the shrine fez, you have the Dumile insignia, the Order of the Eastern Star, you have another shrine fez, another Dumile logo. I guess that's repeating itself. Then the Job's Daughter's triangle and the rainbow insignia. Theosophical Society, the old one, the Theosophy, Rosicrucian Order, and of course the Illuminati, and they made this one quite pronounced. They use a very large one, and if you notice that, that's quite the picture that comes off the dollar bill.
Which one did you say was the Illuminati?
The large one in the bottom corner.
Tell us what you know about the Illuminati.
The Illuminati. There
Laura
are,
Croft.
which Illuminati?
The real Illuminati.
The real Illuminati is basically the Illuminati that people usually refer to as the Bavarian Illuminati. And there are different forms of the Illuminati, but the one has the most conspiracy theories wrapped up into it is the Bavarian Illuminati. There are other ones as well, just as there are many forms of Rosicrucianism. And like any other of the groups, there's a lot of conspiracy theories wrapped up into it. Let's see, again, there isn't a whole lot of time to go into that in detail. Maybe we can pick that back up at the end. There are some books downstairs that cover it well, And also you can put your name on one of the cards downstairs, and I can copy the information down to you and send it to you in full. I sent you some other information and through your library, and that would be no problem. I'd be willing to do that too. Can you keep a secret? No. Everybody wants to be in on a secret.
I'm not good at it.
To be in on a secret, to be part of the crowd. And that's why initiation into a group, and especially into a secret society, is so popular. It partly depends upon the person, but the other aspect of it depends upon the organization. Some people are joiners, other people are not. And though there's an overlap, the reasons for joining a secret society differ from the reasons that people join cults. Now, the initiated into a secret society is usually joining a secret society based upon the type of society that they are joining. For example, a person who joins a social secret society is usually doing so because they're seeking fellowship. And although the lines of demarcation can mix and blur, Alan Axelrod separates these reasons for joining into 9 categories in his book, Secret Societies and Fraternal Orders. I'm going to be using his outline and also be quoting from him in this section quite often. Now, he uses different words, but I like to use the words beginning with P, and I'll be changing some of his and converting them in this next section. The first one that he covers is business, but I call this one patronizing. From giving a promotion to patronizing, some people would rather play favorites with somebody they already know, whether this is on a passive or aggressive level. Now, this is especially true of Masonry. They tend to favor other brothers going to their businesses, and if there's a brother who has a business compared to, if they want to, if they need to buy something, if they need to buy a house, and a brother has a company that they can buy from, they would tend to go to that place first rather than going to an outside group to do that from. So they stick within the lodge rather than going outside sources. And if they are in a company and are needing to give a promotion to someone, they would tend to choose a brother or somebody who are they wanting to make into a brother, rather than to have somebody who is not. They would, if they're trying to get somebody into Masonry, they will say, we'll give you a promotion, and see, we did good by you, and so why don't you join Masonry? We have much more for you, even if they're not qualified for that promotion. But there's only a small percentage of groups that don't do that and are forbidden to make formal contacts during business meetings. Point 2, they desire to be different. Now, this is where a plain, ordinary person can go for an extreme makeover. By joining a secret society, the person can make new friends, and assume a different identity, are given a new name, get promoted and elected to an office with an elaborate title, regalia, a jewel of office, and a badge. They become privy to special secrets and get to leave behind, at least for a few hours, the mundane life that was taking them nowhere special. I remember as my installation as a worthy advisor clearly. All eyes were on me, and when they put the tiara on my head, I was escorted up those 3 important stairs to the east, to the high back chair that felt like a throne, and was handed the gavel. And now I live in Alabama.
Maybe we can call that the Ralph Cramden effect. You had honeymooners. He was a bus driver, but he was part of a, secret society, and
Mm-hmm.
he had all that, so, yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another reason why people join is that they're seeking knowledge. In Rainbow, the girl is taught that she is on a secret for a pot of gold. Now, what would you assume a pot of gold is? A pot of gold, seeking gold. Well, in Rainbow, they're taught that the pot of gold is actually a pot of gold. The gold pot is golden, but there are contents within it that are not golden. And the contents are the BFCL, which is an acronym for the Bible, flag, Constitution, and lambskin apron. And this is a miniature lambskin apron that I was given on my initiation, which is a miniature version of the Masonic apron that Masons are given on their initiation nights. And we're to wear this on Rainbow Sundays and on the special occasions, the memorial services, and on the grand assemblies during the worship services, on the left wrist pointing upward. There are different levels in Masonry, and in each of the levels, the Masons are searching for light. And as I had said before, my father is a Mason, he is a Shriner, and he didn't find the light in the first 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge. He didn't find the light in the middle degrees. He didn't find it in the 32nd degree, and he's not going to find it in the 33rd degree either. The secret knowledge and the arcane teachings that these secret societies provide rarely deliver at a fair proportion to what they promise. Alan Axelrod also gives fear as one of the reasons why people join. However, that really doesn't pertain to this workshop. Point 5, habit. I prefer to call this one pedigree or parental pressure. When I think of the word habit, I tend to think of, well, I might have been in secret society in a past life, and so I think I'll be one in this incarnation as well. Millions of members of Elk, fellow Oddfellows, Masons, etc., join because their fathers or grandfathers were members. And people joining for this reason fall into 2 categories, either the satisfied members or the dissatisfied members who are nominal members. Point 6, status. In many groups, there are circles. In communities, there are circles wherein you must belong to the right group or clubs in order to have social and commercial prominence. By having membership in these particular organizations or groups, you're given to have permission to participate in another organization or local government. In Part B of status, that you have a pecking order, that the society members fall into rank and order according to their offices and degrees that they hold within these groups. This is especially prominent within Masonry, that the 33rd degree Masons are superior to the 32nd degree Masons. The Shriners feel superior to the other Masons. The Master Masons are superior to the Entered Apprentice Masons, and the officers are superior to the Lodge members. Another example would be the Rosicrucians. The poor children who are members of Rosicrucianism, and there are children members, can belong to a group called the Junior Order of Torchbearers. In Rosicrucianism, they start off as a neophyte. They progress through the private mandibus. They go through the first, second, third atriums. They progress to the postulant, and then go through the first, second, and third, fourth degrees. In Freemasonry, you are initiated as an apprentice. You are passed to the fellowcraft and raised to the degree of Master Mason. As I mentioned before, there's the York Rite, which has 10 degrees, the Scottish Rite, which has 30 degrees. And in addition to that, there are 100 or more other rites and degrees for Freemasons. Some of these rites have at least 90 other degrees within each of the rites. And in my 16 years or so of studying different rites and orders for women and children, I've counted at least 56 orders for women and children, specifically that they can participate in. So there are hundreds of rites, degrees, and orders within Masonry.
Now, the groups you're talking about, the 56, are they all come out of Masonry?
They come out of Masonry. There are splinters, schisms, and reinventions of Masonry, yes.
Or Freemasonry claims it's trying to make good men better, so that's kind of the selling point. I mean, is this very widespread branching off and developing these orders? Is this part of an overall philosophy and vision that's trying to incorporate that? In other words, it's trying to totally change culture or try to leaven culture with their own influences and their own desires?
The question is Masonry's goal of being to make good men better. Yes, that is their spoken goal. That is what they hold out to the public as
Right.
wanting to do. And yet, when a lot of men get in there, they tend to devolve into a drunken, I guess there still are Christians within Freemasonry, but the parties that go on within Masonry,
Social setting.
the social tends to take over.
Yeah.
Granted that the old, we'll get into the old school and the new class of Masonry. I think if you'll hold on with me to that, I'll get more to the answer to that a little bit later on. The seventh point of why people join is for mutual aid and protection, acting kind of like a insurance program for people. The eighth point would be special benefits, which I call privilege. The examples of this are the Odd Fellows and the other organizations that will have scholarships for the other members and for the members' children. The Masons have scholarships and for Eastern Star, for the other people, and you don't necessarily have to be related to a Mason or Eastern Star to apply for these and to obtain them. One of the first people I worked with was a young man who came up to me after a talk and said, I have an Eastern Star scholarship. Should I not have that? Should I quit accepting the money? And I'm like, they're giving you money, take it. And they're paying your way. Now on the other end of the spectrum of privilege, I found it quite interesting to come across the information about the origination of the Elks. Supposedly they were founded in New York to get around the law, the liquor law that forbade saloons to open on Sundays. I thought that was kind of peculiar. And the last point whereby people join, according to Alan Axelrod, is that although people join for any other of the reasons mentioned, they would probably not remain in any of the groups unless they enjoyed the other members. And again, another section in which Alan Axelrod does an excellent job that I'm going to use, although I'm going to again rephrase it and add my comments to, is that he divides into 8 categories the different types of secret societies. These include the social, benevolent and service, ethnic, trade, mystical, magical, religious, the political, the criminal, and he tacks on an 8th group called the residual, which he dumps in the categories that are the groups that are difficult to classify. Touch briefly on the social, he would include the Freemasons, although they originally started as a trade group that evolved into the social group. And this would include the Freemasons, the Shriners, the Odd Fellows, the animal lodges like the moose, buffalo, elk, and eagles. Now some of these in the olden days could have been called drinking clubs. Some of these groups still revolve around alcohol, but not all of them. And to answer your question about the old school and new school, the old school of Masons that are fading out, the Masons are tending the old school, averaging probably around the age of 60 or so. And they are not necessarily the party-hardy group that they used to be. And you have the new class of Masons coming in, taking over. And so the new class of Masons is kind of different than the old school of Masons. And so the dynamics of Masonry is changing. What that's going to encompass has not yet settled out, and it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to change, what that's going to evolve into, encompass. It's kind of still in its early formations, and we can only speculate some of what's going to happen.
Now, I was visiting a Masonic website a while back, and he made the case that the way Masonry is now, it peaked in like the 60s in America and went on the decline, but his statement was, and he's a Mason, of course, saying that it's on the increase again, that more people are starting to join it again. Or do you find that to be true or not?
The comment was that in the 60s, the Masonry had been on decline, and now that that Masonry is back on the incline. I agree with that comment, that Masonry is back on the incline, but only on the point that Masonry has now opened its doors, and they are making Masons literally, not literally on the spot, as in they used to, as in they'd walk up to somebody and say, "You are a Mason," like they did with Ronald Reagan. That they would walk up to him and make him a Mason without him ever attending an initiation. But in that, they would still go through an initiation, but not in the same sense. Again, we'll be getting to that a little bit later in this talk. Well, let me cover it now in case we don't get to it. That they are, the new class can go in to a initiation and be entered as a entered apprentice in a weekend and leave that weekend as a Shriner. And the only requirement is that he has a belief in a supreme being and that he brings his checkbook. And Masonry has become a nickel and nose business. They no longer have to do the memorization work. They no longer have to do past proficiencies, and they no longer have to serve their lodge like the old Masons did. And it's caused a lot of friction between the old school of Masons and the new class of Masons. There's a lot of friction there, and a lot of animosity. Was there a question back here?
No, it's like in the church, liberals and conservatives, same thing. right?
Yeah, it's definitely a distinction between the two classes, and, yeah, so. Point 2, that there's benevolent and service groups, that there are the ethnic and cultural groups. I'll talk on this quickly. Axelrod points out that it might be more accurate to call these exile societies, because people rarely feel the need to band together with countrymen when they're in their own country. So logically, where would the ideal home of ethnic societies be?
Communities.
United States.
Yeah.
Because just about every ethnic group that immigrated to the United States either had, or has its own ethnic society. Okay, this one pertains to Freemasonry a lot. Freemasonry, who began as an operative craft, meaning that the men worked with actual stones, was started with 3 classes of members: the mechanical, the instrumental, and the scientific. As time went on, they split also off into speculative Freemasonry, which does not work with free stones or the working tools of the trade, but only uses them in a symbolic manner. Other less skilled trades, like the carbonari or the charcoal burners, considered to be the secret societies, were leading the way as operative craftsmen in their trade. Another example of modern day trade society would be like the Fraternal Order of the Police. I don't think there's as many of these anymore as there used to be. Now the crux of the talk, the magical, mystical, religious groups is the most important. These are probably the most apparent because everyone can name a few. What would be some of these in the group? Can you name a few?
Ordo, tempo, whatever.
Orientis?
Orientis.
Mm-hmm. Any others?
Theosophy.
Mm-hmm. Others would be the Rosicrucians, the Druids, the Golden Dawn, Gnosticism, Swedenborg, Gurdjieff, and yet these tend to be the most obscure because of the mysticism. Alan Axelrod explains the mystical, that the mystical societies may come, in some cases, be indistinguishable from religious societies, but most of them share one characteristic: ultimate incomprehensibility. For the adherent of a mystical secret society, belief alone is rarely enough. There must also be a massive and complex edifice of thought, preferably supported by a massive and opaque canon of mystical literature. Often, mystical societies are infuriatingly vague and elusive to outsiders. It is, for example, next to impossible for non-theosophists to grasp the meaning of theosophy. Now, Masonry's example of the massive canon of mystical literature used to be given to all Scottish Rite Masons, and that's the book Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. And just as I used to have to pass proficiencies to move up in Rainbow, Masons had to pass proficiencies to move up through their degrees. And as I had said before, as someone had asked, Masonry's changed lately because of the sharp membership decline. Masons are now initiated, passed, and raised in a single weekend. And this is taken from the book called Unmasking Freemasonry by Sylvan Stevens. I'll leave that up for you to look at while I move on. The magical aspect of the group differ from the religious group in two main areas. First of all, that they're goal-oriented. These are much more concerned with achieving results. For example, the conjuration of demons or the transmutation of metals, as in alchemy, than with undefined personal improvement. And the other area would be individual potential, and that the emphasis and variations of individual potential to fulfill the end, they stress the importance of individual practice in achieving one's goals. It may demand that they obey a master in a one-on-one relationship rather than abiding by some general creed. Mr. Axelrod cites the example that a Christian may say that he has a one-on-one relationship with Christ, but that no one would expect him to be a slave to his parish priest in order to pursue his chosen path. And the third aspect of the magical, mystical, religious is the religious. This type of society tends to be more straightforward and is focused more clear than a mystical society. The adherent is given something to believe in, and that is what they're supposed to believe. The rules, regulations, and bylaws and details of these orders may be just as voluminous as the society's volume of sacred law itself. The groups are commonly Christian, although pagan groups are found primarily in Europe and secondarily in the United States. Going back to the format of types of secret societies, bringing it back to that point, you also have the political, and these are much less widespread now, due partly to how widespread democracy is. The other category is criminal, and the mafia is criminal to criminal secret societies, what Masonry is to the trade societies. And other examples of criminal societies would include the Neapolitan Camorra with the Garduna in Spain. Now, what is the difference between a secret society and clandestine society? Well, secrecy means concealed and unrevealed, for example, the Masons, and clandestine would mean undercover, as with the mafia. And if we have time and you're interested, we can go back and discuss that point further. Ancient Free and Accepted Masons is probably the most replicated secret society ever, with its members, former members, and wannabes borrowing freely from Masonry's rituals, symbolisms, and signs to create new orders, rites, and degrees or secret societies of their own. This list is almost endless. Ecclesiastes said there is nothing new under the sun, and this is true of most secret societies also. Joseph Smith was a Freemason and borrowed from the Masonic ritual when developing Mormonism. The mystery schools of ancient Egypt and Greece recycled themselves as a pattern for today's mystical societies. As with any cult, fraternal orders, organization, or group, secret societies can be schisms, splinters, or reinventions of other societies. Let's see. Reinventions can be confusing because there's just enough similarity between the revival of the society and the society that preceded them to be undistinguishable. And they may end up renaming their new secret society without giving any consideration as to whether someone else may have been or is still using the same name. For example, all the different varieties of Rosicrucians, the Templars, the Illuminati, and at least a dozen different variations of the Foresters, Theosophy, and anthroposophy being hopelessly intertwined. How much time do we have left? 15 minutes? 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
12 minutes.
12 minutes? Okay. Let's see.
Lori?
Yes.
Question. In your understanding of this, the myth of the so-called Christian lodge in America, where you talk to Masons and they, oh yeah, we're a Christian lodge, not a strange group. Would you say, what percentage of the Masons in America, in your estimation, would call themselves part of a Christian lodge?
Okay, the question was, what percentage of Masons in the United States would call themselves part of the Christian lodge? The, quote, Christian branch of Masonry would be the York Rite. They consider themselves to be the Christian degrees. And yet, that's the branch that has the, let me go back to the diagram. That would be this branch here, the York Rite. This is the Scottish Rite here, and this is the York Rite, which would be the Christian degrees. So these people would tend to consider themselves Christian degrees, although just as there's people in church who are not Christians, I don't believe every person in there are Christians.
Well, I mean, when I say Christian, I mean that in the loose sense. I mean, they call themselves Christians,
Right.
They call it, the myth of the Christian lodge. In your estimation, do you think the majority of the Shriners, if you were to talk to Shriners just one after another, do you think the majority of them would identify themselves as Christians in America still?
Well, let me read something. This is from the Revised Knights Templarism Illustrated, the full and complete illustrated ritual of the 6 degrees of the Council of Commandery, page 287. One of my choicest friends, a man who was a Knight Templar and Knight of Pythias and an Odd Fellow, and I think connected with 1 or 2 other lodges, told me that when he was in the lodges, he was committing every sin he knew about, excepting murder, yet he was an acceptable member of the organization and was a district deputy grand master of one of them. He said that after he was converted, he was on his knees in the chapter. The men on each side of him were the same sort of persons that he had been. Prior to that time, he said that he never thought that it was wrong for such men as he had been, and that they were to kneel down and repeat prayers, but having himself become a Christian, he said it seemed unspeakably horrible for him to be kneeling there between 2 men of immoral and wicked lives, repeating together the Lord's Prayer. He was so affected by the thought that he promised God that if he would allow him to get away from the meeting, he would never associate with these men in that way again. He burned his Knights Templar uniform in the stove. He put a sword handle into the stove and burned off all that wood. He took the blade and buried it in his backyard in the ground. He said it seemed to him that he did not want anything to remind him of that life of sin which he had lived when he was a lodge man. Does that answer it? Let's see.
Interesting.
I liked it. I have some articles up here that talk about the philanthropic works of Masonry, how they have degenerated, and from the Orlando Sentinel. They also talk about, there's one called the Would-Be Shriner, said he was subjected to painful initiation rites. And there's one called Shriner Sued, about a man being blinded during his initiation, that he was shot. And it talks basically about how the initiation rites have devolved into just a sense of nothingness, that the initiations had once held such powerful and emotional symbolism, but they have, when the initiation rites of the operative Masons once had meaning, but now that they incorporated the speculative Masons, that they no longer hold the mystique they once had, and that they no longer have the meaning. And so they just have devolved into tomfoolery. And so if you're interested in those at all, they're up here to read, and I have copies available if you want to put your name on an index card and downstairs and drop it in the tin can that's down there. There's some reasons why secret societies membership is dropped, which is an annual rate of 5 to 10% choice, that there's more entertainment and influence now than there was 100 years ago. Back then, Lodge Night was something to look forward to. The younger generations aren't making the lifelong commitments that our forefathers used to make. They're not doing the studying and the commitments that they used to. We're more a generation of instant gratification, and people are working longer hours, spending more time commuting. We're taking our own automobiles. We're not doing public transportation. With more parents working, we spend more time doing child care and housekeeping responsibilities at home with both parents working. People are isolating themselves from the rest of society, and we don't know our neighbors as well. We substitute visits with phone calls. We hide behind our computer screens, and joining the club seems foreign and irrelevant. And there's also a great historic factor that triggered it back in the 1930s, the Great Depression, that the membership dues, even though they were small and modest, were just too much, and people were just too busy to join. But Alan Axelrod predicts that if there's going to be any future to secret societies, that magical, mystical, religious is probably going to be the one that carries over into the future. That's about it. Does anyone have any questions?
What's the title of Axelrod's book?
It's called Secret Societies and Fraternal Orders. It's the blue book downstairs on my table, the thick one.
Are you selling that, or is that something you have to do some looking for?
It's got the ISBN number on the back, which I suggest you write down, and the name of the publishing company on the inside cover.
What's Axelrod's first name?
Alan, A-L-A-N. Is that all? Thank you.
Thank you.